Welcome to Planting Thoughts, the podcast where we plant quick but powerful seeds of science and psychology into your day. I'm Mike, and today we're talking about something that's been distorted by politics, twisted by rhetoric, and too often stripped of humanity. Today we're talking about transgender lives. Now, let's start right in the brain. According to neuroimaging studies, certain brain regions, such as those involved in self-perception, body ownership, and gender identity, show patterns in transgender people that in many cases align more closely with the gender they identify with rather than simply the sex assigned at birth. For example, a study found in a sample of 24 cis men, 24 cis women, and 24 transgender women pre-hormone therapy, a multivariate classifier of brain structure placed the brains of transgender women as shifted away from their biological sex, male, toward their gender identity, female. In psychology, the American Psychological Association defines gender as a person's deeply felt internal sense of being male, female, a blend of both, or neither. So, gender identity is not just anatomy or chromosomes. It's an inner sense of self. Now, here are several key scientific points. A systematic review found that the structural, functional, and metabolic brain features in transgender brains, this is all pre-hormone, they differ in some metrics from cisgendered individuals. Regarding brain classification, one study showing structural MRIs found that using brain data to classify biological sex resulted in more misclassifications when transgender women were included, suggesting the brains of transgender individuals do not always follow the standard male-female classification of cis brains. In adolescents, a large general population MRI study of around 2,200 adolescents found that there was no difference in global brain volume between those who reported gender diversity and those who did not. But they did find regional cortical thickness differences. Among those assigned male at birth who reported gender diversity, there was a thicker left inferior temporal gyrus than those who did not. Now, it's tempting to say the brains of transgender people are exactly like their identified gender, but that would also overstate the evidence. For instance, the review notes these findings add support to the notion that the underlying brain anatomy in transgendered people is shifted away from their biological sex towards their gender identity. However, a clear consensus is still missing. So, we have good evidence of brain structure and connectivity differences associated with gender identity or incongruence, but we do not have definitive "this is the exact brain signature" consensus yet. All right, so from a psychological standpoint, when the inner sense of gender identity, right, aligns with one's lived gender, the distress people often feel when it doesn't can be mitigated. Gender identity is a real phenomenon in identity psychology. So to summarize, identity isn't a slogan. It's biology, psychology, and lived human experience, all tangled together. Reducing it to just chromosomes is missing most of the picture. And here's the truth. Science is messy. It's complex. It's incomplete. It's full of nuance. Rhetoric? That's loud, simple, and usually dangerous. Politicians and the media like to shout, "There are only two genders," as if that ends the conversation. But the neuroscience and psychology say otherwise, or at least they say more complexity than you think. So let's break it down. The brain evidence. As we just discussed, there is structural, functional, and metabolic evidence that brains of transgendered individuals differ in ways that don't simply map onto the male versus female in a cisgendered sense. For instance, the review Structural, Functional, and Metabolic Brain Differences notes that transgendered individuals before hormone treatment show brain features that differ from cisgendered men and women. The neuroimaging studies in people with gender incongruence review states that brain phenotypes of people with gender incongruence vary in feminine, masculine, demasculinized, and defeminized features. And then the developmental evidence. The adolescent MRI study shows that global brain volume may not differ, but region-specific differences do appear in adolescents who report gender diversity. That suggests that differences may not be purely anatomical, right? They may not be purely anatomical at birth, or they may be subtle and shaped by development, hormones, social environment, perhaps all. All right. Now let's look at rhetoric versus data. Rhetoric often simplifies. Gender is only social. Biology says male, female only. Transgender is a fad. The science does not offer a simplistic male brain, female brain binary that neatly fits all people. Some neuroscience commentary even warns of conceptual and method issues. For example, one paper discusses epistemic injustice in brain studies of transgender identity, pointing out that many neuroscientific studies have a cis bias and oversimplify gender identity into binary categories. The peer review for brain sex in transgender women is shifted, states that a clear consensus is still missing. Hormone therapy effects. Some studies show that when transgendered individuals begin hormone therapy or gender-affirming care, brain connectivity and structure can actually change. Though I still note, not all features are fully studied, and long-term outcomes can obviously vary. For example, the review mentions effects of cross-sex hormone treatment on the brain. So what's the takeaway? The mind-brain evidence supports the idea that gender identity has a biological neural component, but it doesn't boil down to one brain equals male and one equals female for everyone. And social, psychological, hormonal, and environmental factors matter a lot. That means when rhetoric says it's all biology or it's all choice, both are oversimplifications. Science says both, and biology plus development plus psychology. Now let's talk mental health. Honestly, this part kind of bugs me because this is where a lot of the real harm is happening. Not because of who people are, but because of what society does to them. The model most used here is the minority stress model. It suggests that people who are a part of a stigmatized group, including transgendered and gender diverse individuals, face chronic social stressors, discrimination, rejection, non-affirmation, victimization. These stressors lead to elevated risk of depression, anxiety, suicidality, substance use, etc. Now, this model, the minority stress model, it's been applied and validated in multiple studies. And here are the key findings. In a large meta-analysis, right, 69 sources, 47 samples, it found that significant positive associations between gender minority stressors and anxiety and depression, and negative associations between resilience factors and anxiety and depression. A European systematic review found that distal minority stressors, things like, discrimination, victimization, these were strongly associated with mental health problems among European transgender and gender diverse individuals. A study of Hungarian trans adults found that distal stressors, discrimination, rejection, predicted mental health problems, and that internalized transphobia and negative expectations mediated via hopelessness to depression, anxiety, suicidality. Regarding substance use, a recent article found that distal minority stress, not proximal, was significantly associated with drug and alcohol use frequency and problems in transgender and gender diverse individuals. Putting that all together, when people are consistently told they don't belong, when they face harassment, when their identity is denied or invalidated, the psychological toll is huge. It's not an identity problem, it's a social problem. And importantly, studies also show that affirming care community support, resilience resources like self-compassion, social support, these types of things, they can improve mental health outcomes. For instance, one review found that self-compassion is negatively associated with minority stress and with psychological distress. So a key psychological talking point, if we want better outcomes, we need to reduce the stressors and build up the buffers. And here's where the science meets real, lived experience, and why rhetoric matters. Hate crimes and violence against transgendered people are rising in many places. For instance, news reports and surveys show elevated rates of violence, harassment, denial of services. The rhetoric used by media, politicians, and public discourse can amplify stigma. When leaders call gender identity an ideology or a fad, or erase recognition of trans people in law or policy, that has real consequences. Dehumanization is not just words, it precedes harm. Now let's ground this in stories and research. There was a trans man from Georgia, and he had to flee, or he felt like he had to flee to the Netherlands, saying harassment and threats had tripled in recent months. Slurs, pushing him, denying bathroom access, etc. He began his medical transition only abroad where he felt safe. And then there was a young trans person in Texas who lost access to puberty blockers when their state banned care. They said they no longer knew the meaning of safety. The meaning of safety. Now, from research, the minority stress studies I mentioned earlier, right? They show how distal stressors like discrimination and proximal stressors like internalized transphobia, expectation of rejection, etc., work together to really undermine a person's mental health. For example, in the Hungarian study, right, internalized transphobia and negative expectations led to hopelessness, which led to depression, anxiety, and eventually suicidality. And when lawmakers pass bans on gender-affirming care, or when leaders erase recognition or remove protections, it's not protecting children. From a psychological science standpoint, these actions create stress. They manufacture trauma. Another point, the importance of recognizing transgendered individuals as full humans with ordinary lives. They are students, they are neighbors, they are coworkers, they are artists, they are parents. They laugh at bad jokes, they binge Netflix too late, they forget to take out the trash, just like the rest of us. So what does all this science and psychology tell us we should do? What are some of the actionable ideas out there that we can, take action on? Firstly, affirming environments matter. If gender identity is real, brain-linked, and psychologically relevant, then environments that affirm someone's identity reduce stress. Schools, workplaces, healthcare, all have to apply that. You can also reduce distal stresses, discrimination, rejection, and invalidation. These are major predictors of mental health problems. Policies and culture that reduce stigma reduce harm. Support buffers, things like resilience, self-compassion, social support. Research shows self-compassion and community support help buffer minority stress. Interventions in therapy or schools could build these. And what about medical and therapeutic care where appropriate? Right? While the science on brain changes post-hormone therapy is still evolving, studies show hormone therapy has effects on brain connectivity and structure. Ensuring access to competent care reduces distress and improves outcomes consistent with mental health services. Education. Science shows complexity, not simplistic binary. We need to educate audiences. Gender identity has biological, psychological, developmental components. Simplistic slogans mislead. Listen to lived experience. Scientific studies provide data. Humans provide narrative. Together, they build a deeper understanding. Avoid treating transgendered individuals as case studies. They are people with full, beautiful lives. So, succulents, yes, still keeping the nickname. Let's plant this seed. Science over rhetoric, humanity over dehumanization, identity over erasure, and a simple call: let people be. If this episode resonated, subscribe, share it, rate it, help those blossoms grow. Next week on Planting Thoughts, I'll talk about teen vaping and the psychological tricks industries use to hook young brains. Spoiler alert, watermelon bubblegum should never taste like nicotine. Later, peeps.